Good morning, church. Great to be with you today. And I'm Sam. Some of you know me, some of you maybe not. I'm married to the wonderful Jo. And you've probably seen our two little ones, Francesca and Lorcan, raiding the after-dinner biscuits. We've been coming here for about 7 years now. And you may also know Jo's mum and dad, Rory and Roz. And I was going to say something praiseworthy of them, but Roz is here today and I don't want to be a sook. So let me give you a quick sketch about me just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from today. I've always loved wondering about the big questions in life. I love when a new perspective helps me be more alive to what is true and to connect with others and with God. I've always loved reading from a young age. I didn't always get on that well at school, but as a teenager, I much preferred hanging out with my friends, mucking out stables at a local farm with these amazing creatures we call horses. Preferred doing all of that than my homework, but despite my best efforts, I ended up going to university. And it was a no-brainer for me to pick philosophy. And a teacher had given me this French existentialist novel set in the Second World War, and I just became hooked on how people find meaning and how human history shapes that. I was devastated, however, sitting down my first week at uni to be taught this thing called formal logic, which is basically maths without numbers. Exactly. And it didn't get much better, really. Logical positivism, phenomenalism, post-structuralism, more isms than I can remember. And it dawned on me that studying philosophy, unfortunately, wouldn't involve sitting under a tree and musing about life and death, but instead playing a lot of quite elaborate games with language. I did make some wonderful friends there, though, and I had powerful encounters with God, who broke through the tedium of analytical philosophy and academic perfectionism to show me the truth and power of love. These days, when I'm not spending time with Jo and the children, I work in overseas aid. I've traveled in about 70 countries, worked on around 30, lived in a dozen, mostly in Africa. So, yeah, any good I've done trying to tackle poverty is probably being outweighed by my carbon footprint. The purpose of this talk is to give you a taster for this series on symbols that we're starting on Thursday. It started for me in the COVID lockdowns, actually. I found myself drawn to some of these stories and symbols. And just feeling I hadn't really had a Scooby about what they were about. Why did Jesus curse the fig tree? Why did Jesus ask his disciples to buy swords? What is the sign of Jonah? What's the deal with all these sheep and goats and lambs and rams? So anyway, I kind of got stuck into those things, and I certainly haven't figured it all out, but I wanted to share some of the things I've been learning and the questions that had been coming up for me as I've been diving into those symbols, and hoping that they'd be stimulating and encouraging for you and your faith as well. So this morning I'm going to do two things. First, just do a bit of grounding on what a symbol is and why it matters when you read the Bible. And second, use that understanding to briefly explore the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana. Okay, what's a symbol? Can any of you think of a symbol you've seen today coming into church? On your way? Poppy? Absolutely, yeah. Lots of poppies. And lots of different kinds of poppies, red poppies, some white poppies, sometimes purple poppies for the animals. So the word symbol comes from the Greek symbolon, which comes from a verb meaning thrown together, put together, or compare. So in ancient Greece, a symbolon was a physical object made out of cut stone or carved wood or pottery that was used to represent an idea or a relationship. The symbol was broken in half and then it was put back together again at the right time. It could be used, for instance, as an agreement between traders, or to represent a bond between two Greek tribes. And the act of putting the pieces back together again had a contractual or a ceremonial purpose to remind them of their relationship. Today, the word symbol is part of our everyday language, and symbols are all around us. Take a road sign. What does this mean? Stop. So I'm assuming Glenn can't speak Burmese. Is that? No? No? So we know to interpret this red octagon as a stop sign. It's a pretty universal symbol. The same with the flag, though here it starts to get a bit more interesting. An identical flag can have very different meanings depending on where you are, what's happening, and who you are. So take the Union Jack. Obviously, we're thinking about this today, and imagine for a moment you're a veteran and you're honoring your fallen comrades. You're standing this very morning, at this very time, at the cenotaph, and you're recalling the faces and the voices of the people who stood at your side going into battle and who didn't make it. You remember their ultimate sacrifice. You reflect on the life you've had which they lost. Most of us are not veterans, but we probably know someone or have someone in our family who was. And we pause each year on this day to recall what they experienced, what their loss means to us. So the flag represents something on this day. Now imagine it's the summer of 2012, the Olympics opening ceremony, and you're Chris Hoy, the boy from Murrayfield, carrying the flag out, your family and loved ones cheering you on from the stands. You've been building for this day for 4 years of continuous training and competing. Everyone's ready. Team GB is absolutely buzzing. If you made it to London, any of you, you might remember British people were actually talking to each other on the tube. We weren't convinced with the mascots, but there was so much smiling and excitement and pride. And you, Chris Hoy, standing there, you may be visualizing what it would be like to stand on the podium beneath the same flag in 6 days' time, singing the national anthem, having won the sprint, the team sprint. So what thoughts and feelings does this flag conjure then? Now imagine it's the 29th of May, 2011, just over a year before those London Olympics. You're an Afghan and you live in a small town called Nowzad in Helmand province. A life-shattering explosion has just ripped the town apart. It's an Allied airstrike following a tip-off about Taliban insurgents. A neighbor runs out holding the limp body of their youngest child. 14 innocent civilians have been killed. 5 girls, 7 boys, and 2 women. And you join an angry crowd heading to the next town where an Allied forces compound bears the Union Jack. What does that flag mean to you now? So in different contexts and different experiences, the exact same arrangement of stripes and shapes and the same colors hold very different meanings and bring up different feelings. And that's the thing with symbols, they rarely hold a single simple meaning. We need to do some work to understand all of the historical, social, political, economic, cultural factors at play that inform what a symbol means at any point in time. In fact, language itself is symbols. I'm standing here making sounds that you're recognizing as corresponding to a particular set of meanings. That's how we're communicating. That meaning is rarely an exact match because we each carry a set of experiences, preferences that imbue words with certain meanings. If I say to you, I'm red through and through, What I mean, or what you think I mean, may depend on whether we're talking about football or whether I'm Welsh and mad about rugby, and whether you know that or not. Or whether we're both members of the Scottish Socialist Party. Or whether I'm a compulsive riddler and the answer is rust. So you get the gist. Different contexts, different situations bring out very different meanings from a single word, a single symbol. And why does this matter? Well, when we read the Bible, as we seek to connect with God through Scripture that His breath has inspired, how much we understand the meanings that individual words and symbols hold will help us more fully interpret and encounter what the text is saying to us. Have you ever noticed that Jesus was a highly symbolic communicator? I mean, there are the parables, of course, carefully picked stories using symbols from local agriculture, local cuisine, religious culture, the political structures, the economic systems of the day. And he uses these symbols to reveal truth and meaning. What is God's kingdom like? What does it mean to enter it? How are we to see each other? What is God truly like? But it's not just the parables. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees. I am the true vine. Destroy this temple. Take, eat, this is my body. You must be born again. And it's not just his words. Drawing in the sand with his finger when a group of men has gathered to stone a woman caught in adultery. Spitting on the mud to make a paste and put it in the blind man's eyes. Holding up a denarius when questioned about tax. Washing his disciples' feet. Jesus is a highly symbolic communicator with his words and his actions. So let's take a look now at this story at the wedding in Cana. We all know the story. Jesus turns water into wine, and John tells us this was the first of his signs manifesting his glory. The immediate and most common interpretation of that is, well, scientifically speaking, he's just performed a miracle. The process of fermentation that takes days and weeks, he's performed instantaneously and without the required base material of grapes. And this reveals his divinity. And that's a sound conclusion. But if we stop there, I believe we're missing deeper, fuller meanings. So let's unpack what wine means in the first place. What could it have meant at that time? If you look across the Old Testament, wine is, well, a very loaded substance and very complicated. There are so many positive associations. Melchizedek, the great high priest that the letter to the Hebrews says foreshadows Jesus, brings out bread and wine as he's about to bless Abram. Wine is included under the law as a drink offering and usually as part of celebrating the harvest that God has provided. It is God, the psalmist tells us, who created wine to gladden the heart of humans. And the fruit of the vine, wine, are repeatedly mentioned as part of the bounty of the promised land that God gives the Israelites. After Ezra reads the Holy Law for the first time in generations, Nehemiah instructs the people to go away and drink sweet wine, for the day is holy and the joy of the Lord is their strength. In the new earth, foreseen by the prophets, the mountains will drip with wine. Come, everyone who thirsts, come buy wine and milk, without money and without price. But then alongside these, there is a raft of negative associations. Drink no wine or strong drink when you go into the tent of meeting, lest you die. The Nazarite, who makes a special vow to God, shall separate himself from the consumption of wine. He shall not even drink the vinegar made from wine, nor the grape themselves. The prophets envision a cup of foaming wine in the hand of the Lord, that the wicked will be made to drink down to the dregs. And Jeremiah, in one of his darker moods, adjures that God will fill every jar with wine and make the inhabitants of the land drunk and dash them against each other without mercy for their judgment. Isaiah accuses the priest and the prophet of reeling with wine and staggering with strong drink, stumbling in giving judgment. So in some passages, wine is a sign of God's blessing, created specifically for our enjoyment, a symbol of material blessing and abundance, but more than that, a symbol of a thriving spiritual community, of individual spiritual bliss, and of God's abundant grace. But in other passages, wine is a curse, both a symptom and a cause of sin, associated with wrath and judgment, to be shunned if we want to be near God. It's confusing, right? And folks, it gets even wilder. What is Jesus using to produce this wine? The very vessels that were meant to be holding the water for the purification. Why on earth does he take this risk with such a loaded symbol? And not only that, why does he double down by mixing it with the purification technology of the day? I mean, is he saying it's okay to get drunk? Is he saying we don't need to richly purify ourselves? It would have been a lot less confusing, less liable to misinterpretation, if he'd chosen something else to manifest his glory, like turning water into anointing oil at the synagogue, or maybe just starting with feeding of the thousands. You know, the bread is a lot more straightforward. And then there's the political and economic backdrop to all this. So it's believed that the domestication of the grape for the production of wine started in what is present-day Georgia and spread south through Turkey to the Levant and west to Greece and the Mediterranean. Wine, we know, was grown anciently in what is today Israel and important to its commerce. There was an archaeological find a few years ago in Egypt that revealed that a dynasty there around the pharaohs around 3000 BC imported large volumes of wine from Palestine. Under Roman rule, historical sources indicate that the Jewish economic elite, which overlapped with the religious elite, owned the larger vineyards, and this was an important source of their wealth. In fact, Roman rule served them quite well, as it opened up much longer and much more profitable trade routes across the Mediterranean and Asia Minor. Some members of this elite who are deriving wealth are the very same who would consider anyone consuming wine, especially for pleasure, a sinner. Many types of wine were produced in the first century. Some of it was premium grade, expensive for fine dining, but most of it was low grade and large quantities of it. And in fact, it was for daily consumption pretty much for everyone. People avoided drinking plain water because of sanitation and hygiene being very poor. They would get sick. So by mixing a little wine with their water, they could disinfect what they were drinking. And this had an important economic function as well, to enable the majority of people who were poor, landless, daily laborers, to continue building the palaces and the temples, to continue producing the clothes, to continue harvesting the food that kept the empire provisioned. and the same poor who were then taxed on their meager income by the empire and again with the Jewish elite in cahoots. A fine wine would have been a very rare thing for an ordinary Jew to drink. And most Jews would have associated wine with the basic need to not get sick, not lose a day's work so they can survive. No doubt also seeing it as the drug that kept them under the imperial yoke and dependent on their Jewish overlords. What materials and technologies today, I wonder, do we depend on in our daily lives just to make ends meet? And are these liberating us or enslaving us to the order of the world? So wine is pretty loaded. What does this all mean? There were so many threads to individually unpack, but there's a danger, I think, to focus in on one at the expense of another. And I'm just going to suggest three big picture implications. So I believe, first of all, that it's no accident that Jesus chooses such a loaded and scandalous substance to manifest his glory. The text doesn't tell us, but could it be that his initial hesitation is in part caused by the awareness, obvious to any Jew at this time, of how dangerous it would be to wade into wine? But he does, and he doesn't do half measures. He appears to be coaxed by his mother initially, but then it's his choice to use the purification jars and go all the way. And I suggest to you this is a deliberate subversive act. It is meant to shock. It is meant to shatter expectations and bring things together that initially don't make sense. I believe he is saying, I am not what you expect. I go into risky, forbidden territory, for I am Lord there also. I'm utterly surprising and more complex than you expect. You can't simplify me into a single linear story or a single meaning, or collapse me into a clean, singular, dare I say, systematic theology. You can't play it safe because I don't. That's not who I am or how I am. The Alpha and Omega, meaning many things and everything. The great I am and the still quiet voice. The value of a shock is to stop you in your tracks and make you rethink your assumptions. To renew your mind, the way to transformation. To repent is, in the original Greek, metanoia, to think after something new, to come to think at a different level, to have a fundamental change of perception. And Jesus is always doing the unexpected, the shocking, to prise open our minds and our hearts to see more of God. This realization that we don't fully know or understand God, that our attempts to define and pigeonhole God leads to dryness and thirst. The realization that God is in the business of surprising us places us in a different, more reverent and more curious disposition towards him. I love the word mystery. And the best definition of mystery I've come across is this. A mystery isn't something that you can't know. It's something so vast and so deep and so rich that you will never come to the end of knowing it. So at some level, Jesus chooses this moment and turns water into wine, I believe, because it would shock. And because it invites us to this day to ponder these things and the many meanings it holds in our hearts. Can you remember a time when God shocked you? What happened next? Did you feel less alive or more alive? The mystery of God is an invitation, not a stop sign. Secondly, as well as being radically, dangerously surprising, Jesus is also amazingly concrete with his miraculous signs. Lepers are actually healed. The blind actually receive sight. Water is turned into wine and then drunk. His glory has physical reality and a kind of normalcy to it. The Greek word in John's Gospel for glory is doxa, and this primarily means good opinion or judgment. In the New Testament, it's often translated as glory. A more literal translation of the text might read, "This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, evoking his high renown." But for the first-person Jewish or Aramaic-speaking witness of the actual event, the word we most often have translated as glory is kavod. And kavod is an astounding word. It holds a range of meanings. It can mean mass, as in physical mass, heaviness, something that weighs a lot of great value, like a precious metal. It can also mean liver, a physical organ. And it can also mean interior, and it can mean soul. In Jewish thought, the physical and the spiritual are bound together. Our Western way of thinking has been shaped by centuries of dualistic philosophy that separates the body and the spiritual, the matter and the mind. You know, when the Bible says that Jesus felt compassion towards someone, the text says he was moved in his bowels, because in Semitic and other Near East cultures, that's where the seat of the soul and the emotions is. So for a Jew, glory was something very concrete, very bodily. It involves mass, heaviness, concreteness, organs, something you feel, something your senses engage with. And there's even an interpretation of kavod, and this blows my mind, as meaning gravity, as in gravitational force. That mysterious force that continues to puzzle quantum scientists, which centrifugally flings the universe out into existence and centripetally binds galaxies and solar systems and stars and planets and atoms together, and the building blocks of life, all the life forms on our planet and our very bodies. Kavod, something you can't pinpoint but is right in front of you and holds it all together, and you can feel in your innermost being, in your gut, God's glory. Like lifting and feeling a terracotta cup, heavy and filled to the brim with wine, thicker than water, more opaque, smelling its aroma, feeling its sticky liquid past your lips, tasting its flavor, feeling its warmth in the pit of your stomach. His glory is not fundamentally in the realm of abstract theologies and discourses. His glory has substance. How have you seen or felt God's presence this week in the ordinary? Thirdly and finally, and John tells us so, the act of turning water into wine is a sign, a signpost, a symbol of what the Messiah is and means. So we've seen some of why making wine in this context is quite shocking. How it would have revealed to those who knew he did that miracle that he understands their world and its contradictions. He knows their history as a nation, their holy scriptures and their religious observances. He knows the powers and principalities of the day. He knows their livelihoods and the relationship to the land as individuals under Roman rule, exploited by the Jewish religious and economic elite. He knows the things they do to be seen as good, like washing their hands in ritual water, and the things that they do that they may be ashamed of, like drinking, strong wine, flouting religious law, or colluding with empire to profit whilst hypocritically forbidding its consumption. He knows it all. And we know weddings at this time were arranged. We don't know anything about the couple. We don't know if they were childhood sweethearts or being married to enlarge a family's land, cement a political alliance, or pay off a debt. We don't know if their marriage was to be one of happiness or unhappiness. But we know Jesus was there. And his signpost to what a Messiah is in this wedding where the hosts have embarrassingly run out of wine is first and foremost to meet them in the midst of it all. What kind of Messiah is Jesus? What does a Messiah even mean? I'm going to turn up where you least expect me. I'm going to meet you at your point of need, where you think I would never be, where you've been taught I would have nothing but judgment for you. And when I find you there, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you abundantly with the best wine, with the best of God's promises. No matter how messy or complex or contradictory the situation, I know. And I'm going to meet you and bless you at the intersection of ritual holiness and inebriation, at the intersection of purity and compromise, at the intersection of spontaneous celebration and bonded labor. Wherever life is complicated or contradictory or stuck, at the crossroads of the sacred and the secular, at the crossroads of communal conjugation and imperial subjugation, at the crossroads of togetherness and loneliness, at the crossroads of hope and resignation, at the crossroads of joy and suffering. At the cross.